This video I will talk about solid tips versus tubular tips when it comes to lure fishing rods. In the last couple years I did quite a bit of lure fishing and I used both types of rods. So I believe I'm in a very good position to do this comparison. Also, you will not find in this video's answer which one is better, because obviously it will depend on the situation. In some situations the tubular will be better, whilst in the other situations the solid ones will be much better. And also it very much depends on the fishing style as well. I will split this video into 5 big sections. I will cover bite indication, presentation, durability, rigs to be used and which are better with a certain rod, and also I will cover rod action and casting. So let's get all those blocks covered. As you can see, I have two rod tips here. The one with the white band here is a solid one, and it's actually a little bit thinner as well. And black one is just a tubular one. So the bite indication on the rod with the tubular tip feels much better into the hand when you just play your lure, and when the fish takes the lure and it takes it a little bit more aggressively, the bite transmits through the line and through the rod beautifully, and you feel the bite into the hand like a little pluck, and then you strike and it's fish on, hopefully. And when it comes to the rods which do have a solid tip, the bite indication is not as good to the hand, because obviously that's a solid tip in this case from here to here. So that's a tubular, and then the tubular stops and the solid tip is just glued into the tube, if you like. And obviously it has like a glue here and everything, and the bite indication with the solid tips to the hand is not as good. Obviously sometimes you will feel the bite, but it won't be as pronounced as with the tubular ones. But also I have to mention that solid tips most of the time they will have a little painted section, and you will be able to see slower bites and a little bit like less aggressive bites with a solid tip, which you wouldn't be able to see or feel with a tubular tip. So again, it will depend on the situation really, which one will be better when it comes to bite indication. When it comes to presentation, these two different rod types can be used in different situations. For example, the rod with a tubular tip is much better when you will be doing classic jigging presentation. By that I mean when you will be bouncing in jumps your weight with the lure across the bottom. This is purely because the tubular carbon tip is much more rigid. It's not as bendy, so when you will be lifting the lure off the bottom, it will just spring it back with the power and with the inertia, so it won't drag it, but it will bounce it. And this is purely because the tubular tip has more rigidity just by the end. And when it comes to solid tips, they are much better when you will be doing twitchy presentation. This is purely because when you will be holding the rod and will introduce small movements, the tip, which is very bendy and flexible, will resonate, and it will introduce and make the lure dance in the water beautifully. When it comes to the rigs, I would say that the rods with the tubular tips are not as good to be used in conjunction with the rigs where the weight is separated from the lure. This is purely because when the fish will take the lure, which will be away from the weight, quite often the angler won't see the bite or won't feel the bite, because the bite will be quite supple, if you like. Quite often it will be a little pull to the side, nothing aggressive really. So with the rod with a tubular tip, you won't feel slow bite into the hand, And also you won't be able to see such a bite on the tip because the tip is just not bendy enough. So for these kinds of rigs, I would say that solid tips or rods with the solid tips are much better. Even though the rods with the solid tips are thinner, or the tips are thinner, I would say that those tips are a little bit more durable to linear crush, if you like. And I can do things like that with a solid tip, and it does not break, as you can see. And really, I wouldn't be able to do the same thing with a tubular tip. I would break it most likely because the tip is more rigid, even though those are the tips from the rods which are rated casting weight up to 10 grams, both of them. When it comes to rod action and casting, there are some differences as well. For example, rods with the solid tips will flick out very light weights, and by light I mean like 1 gram, let's say, or 2 grams, much easier, because the tip is very flexible and it is able just to flick the lure out, even though the lure might be just very light one. On the opposite side, tubular tips are much better when it comes to casting far. This is purely because tubular tips, or the recovery of the tip, is much faster. If you imagine you cast out and the tip will stop bouncing much faster than the ones on the rods with the solid tips. So you can cast much further with the rod with a tubular tip. And when it comes to the action, obviously the rods with the tubular tips, they won't have any extra joints like in the middle, so the actions on the rods with the tubular tips will be just much better. All in all, both these rod types have their own place. I actually use both. If I would have to pick just one, probably it would be the one with a solid tip. This is purely because of my fishing style, and also I quite like that the tips are a little bit more durable as well. But it will be it from me for today. I hope you will find this video useful. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.